Caleb Turner had spent most of his life alone on the Arizona frontier, and he believed he understood the silence of the desert better than he ever understood people. But that evening, as the sun sank behind the red cliffs and the air cooled into a dusky hush, something in the wind felt wrong. His horse, normally steady as stone, twitched beneath him and let out a nervous snort. Caleb followed the animal's gaze toward the dry creek bed lined with scraggly brush and a lone cottonwood tree that stood like a ghostly sentinel against the fading sky. As he rode closer, his breath caught. Hanging from one of the lower branches was a small figure. For a heartbeat he thought it was a lifeless body, his heart freezing in his chest. But when he slid off his horse and ran forward, he found a young Apache girl tied with worn leather straps, her head slumped but her chest still rising in shallow breaths. Beside her dangled a crudely carved wooden sign with jagged letters that read, "White man don't forgive." Caleb felt a chill crawl up his spine. The words weren't a warning from the Apaches. They were too pointed, too dramatic. Someone wanted a reaction from whoever found her. Someone wanted trouble. He cut the straps carefully and caught her before she fell. She was light, far too light, as if she hadn't eaten properly in days. Her skin was bruised along her arms, and her small wrists were raw from the bindings. Caleb lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, steadying her limp form as he rode back toward his ranch. He didn't know why he felt so protective of a child he'd never met, but something deep inside him refused to leave her to die under that tree. The girl awoke during the night, frightened and confused, sitting up on his cot with wide, dark eyes. She flinched from him at first, but when he offered her water and spoke gently, she allowed herself to breathe. After a long period of silence, she whispered her name, Taji. Her voice trembled as she told him fragments of what happened: men who weren't Apache, men who spoke harshly and laughed loudly, men who tied her up and left her where she would be found. Caleb listened, jaw clenched, realizing the truth. Someone wanted settlers to blame the Apache. Someone wanted war. He stayed by the fire that night, watching the fragile girl sleep, wondering who in the territory was willing to sacrifice a child just to spark bloodshed. And as the flames flickered low and the desert wind crept through the cracks of his cabin, he understood that finding Taji was no accident. Someone had chosen that tree, that message, that moment. And Caleb Turner, whether he liked it or not, was now part of something far larger than himself. Taji warmed to Caleb slowly, like a winter fire coaxed back to life from dying embers. By morning, she trusted him enough to eat the small meal he cooked: cornbread, dried venison softened in broth, and a tin cup of warm water. She sat curled near the hearth, watching every sound and shadow as if each one held a memory she wished to avoid. Caleb didn't push her with questions. He knew enough about fear to recognize when silence was the only comfort a person had left. But when the sun climbed high and the world outside brightened, she spoke again, unprompted. She explained that she had been taken while gathering roots near her people's camp. The men who grabbed her weren't Apache. They smelled of whiskey and old gunpowder. One of them wore a rusted badge, not from any lawful post but kept as a scrap of authority. They argued constantly, blaming settlers for thefts and Apache for raids, though Taji said neither side had done the things they accused. Caleb recognized the description: they were outlaws who drifted between towns, stirring trouble wherever they passed. Men who believed chaos would bring opportunity. Men who cared about nothing but their own profit. As she spoke, Caleb's thoughts darkened. He had seen enough of the frontier to know how fragile peace truly was. Every treaty, every handshake, every quiet day of coexistence balanced on a razor's edge. A single lie could ignite a fire that would burn for years. And these men had tried to start one using a child. After Taji finished, she stared at the floor as if bracing for judgment. Caleb simply nodded. "It ain't your fault," he said gently. "And I'll make sure no one uses you to start a war." Her shoulders loosened, a breath she'd been holding finally released. But there was more at stake than just keeping her hidden. Rumors traveled faster than truth, and the message on that sign, "White man don't forgive," would spread through the settlers like rot. Some hot-headed rancher or frightened family could lash out first, and then retaliation would follow. Caleb realized he needed answers, and soon. He saddled his horse, told Taji she would stay safely inside, and headed toward Red Bluff, hoping the town hadn't already succumbed to panic. As he rode, dust rising behind him like a trailing ghost, tension coiled tighter in his chest. He could almost hear the whispers beginning, carried from porch to saloon to campfire, claims of Apache aggression, warnings of danger, calls for rifles. If the outlaws' plan had already taken root, confronting them would be harder. But Caleb made a quiet promise to the desert wind as he pushed his horse faster: he wouldn't let fear win. Not this time. Not with a child's life and two people's peace hanging in the balance. Caleb reached Red Bluff before noon, the town buzzing like a kicked anthill. Folks clustered in tight groups outside the saloon, the general store, even by the water trough. Their voices carried a sharpness he recognized too well, fear sharpened into suspicion. As he tied his horse, he overheard fragments of conversations, claims of Apache attacks at the northern ridge, warnings that a rancher's cattle had gone missing, and mutterings that it was only a matter of time before they struck first. Caleb felt a cold heaviness settle in his stomach. None of it made sense. The Apache in that region were usually careful, cautious, and weary of unnecessary conflict. These rumors were seeds carefully planted, already sprouting into wild vines of paranoia. He pushed through the saloon doors, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. Inside, the air smelled of whiskey and smoke. Men hunched over tables, their voices low but urgent. Caleb walked quietly to the corner, pretending to study the room while ordering a drink he had no intention of finishing. Soon enough, he spotted them. Two rough-looking men sat at a table near the back, a crooked-toothed cowboy with a scar across his cheek and a lanky fellow with greasy hair. Their clothes were dusty, but not like working men, more like drifters who lived on the run. Caleb recognized them instantly from Taji's descriptions. He watched them carefully, listening as they drank and boasted. They didn't bother speaking discreetly, too drunk or arrogant to care. "Told ya those settlers would eat it up," the scarred man slurred. "They see that sign, they'll be calling for Apache blood by sundown." The lanky one laughed, banging his cup on the table. "And wait till they hear what we got planned next. Once we hit that wagon trail, folks'll blame the Apaches again. They'll start the fight for us." Caleb's jaw tightened until it ached. Every word confirmed his fears. They weren't just stirring trouble, they were engineering a full-scale conflict. But confronting them here, in the middle of the saloon, would only turn chaos into gunfire. He stepped outside, his mind racing. He needed proof. He needed allies. And most importantly, he needed to return to Taji before anyone else discovered she was missing. As he mounted his horse, he noticed the sheriff across the street talking to some townsfolk. The sheriff was an old friend of Caleb's, but the man looked torn between duty and the pressure of frightened settlers. Even if Caleb told him the truth, would anyone listen? Would they believe that outlaws, not the Apache, were behind the attacks? The stakes were rising fast, and every hour mattered. Caleb urged his horse into a gallop, dust trailing behind him as the sun beat down. He had no choice now but to protect the girl, expose the lies, and pray he wasn't already too late to stop the fire from spreading.